All right, so in this section, we're going to be covering a lot of the topics that we were seeing uh, in the last several paragraphs. The issue of um, workers' rights, the issue of the rich and the powerful versus the common working American, what to make of, having a capitalist system, and to promote pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and the right to succeed and to generate wealth, but in a way that is not lacking balance, like we're seeing. Well, let me rephrase this. Essentially, I think what you see, and if you look at the Haymarket uprising, riot, however you want to call it, that we talked about earlier, the Pullman strike, and some of the large numbers that started to occur in joining unions at the time, and the popularity of really strong critiques of capitalism, by having many socialist groups that go all the way to wanting full-on total socialism, communism, and anarchist movements questioning the authority of the state. We're going to see that these movements, those ideologies had a lot of sympathy, and I think that no matter what your experience has been in life and what your politics are now, you would be really hard pressed not to understand why many workers were gravitating towards these kind of views. Now, what we see happen is politicians and leaders in industry having their own kind of, I don't want to say existential crisis, but a reflection about what's going to happen here. You know, in a certain sense, I don't think this is much different than a topic that we'll cover later, which is the issue of segregation and what Martin Luther King Jr. and that whole movement, the anti-segregation movement, is going to bring. Where the wealthy, even to a certain extent the middle class and politicians, are fine with letting the people on the top do their thing, getting their way, and they're not really concerned about what's happening to the people that are suffering under certain policies. But as the people start to uprise, and as Americans start creating louder shouts for their voices, and as we will definitely see in this chapter, when national tragedy hits and you have women, young girls leaping out of buildings caught on fire because of the conditions that their bosses are putting them in, and when you're really looking at children with missing limbs, your nation you get to a point where you have to kind of ask yourself, is this what we are? Is this where we're going, or what are we going to do? And capitalism is an individualistic ideology, right? Now, I'm going to try to teach this from as neutral of a standpoint as possible. Capitalism promotes individualism, which is something that we value as Americans. But nationalism, the idea that you are a nation and that you promote the ideas of your nation state, that you have the United States of America, implies something about a kind of common connection where you think in a certain way collectively. And I think that if you look at how nation states operate, this has been a tension that every political ideology in every state has had to deal with. Where does the sanctity of the individual start and stop, next to juxtaposed to the greater good of society as a whole, to the nation, right? And capitalism has a tendency to promote a lot of self-interests that often maybe a wealthy capitalist that knows better is going to promote as being a part of the national good. But when you see your society falling apart, it doesn't take a genius to realize that, wow, like we're not operating as a nation, but we have these individuals, almost kind of like mob wars, between powerful elites duking it out for who gets to be at the top, with no real consciousness of there actually being American interests at heart, right? And isn't that kind of like what we're even debating and questioning about within the American discourse now? If a wealthy man comes to power, is this man promoting something just of himself, or can he, or does his wealth directly relate to giving something to the rest of us? Where does that all fit in? And I think that we see this here, that that push for laissez-faire capitalism appeared to many leaders to not be working, that it wasn't really creating the kind of America that they thought was healthy. And we get a progressive movement, which was somewhat different than a populist movement. And we'll go into more details and discussions about progressivism. And we're going to watch a few documentaries to really kind of visualize the things that were at stake during this time. So, first of all, I want to just kind of break down what we're going to be talking about here. So we're covering the time frame of the end of the 19th century, the Gilded Age, which for many was just unbearable in terms of this wealth disparity. Okay, but we're not that much different as we go and turn into the 20th century. Okay, and so what you really are seeing is that push against letting business just get away with doing what they're wanting. Now, I want you to kind of like maybe reflect upon this, and I think this is good to help visualize what you're learning, and to also think about what would be the best way to move forward in modern politics. We always hear that the problem is government getting in the way of business. And that people call for saying, hey, government regulation is a kind of tyranny. That was what was said in the Gilded Age, and it's still said now. Many historians point out, well, but look what our country looked like when we didn't have regulations. Look what happened when laissez-faire capitalism was more of a thing. And what were we seeing? Now, is this a fair analysis? Are we looking at this wrong? Was the issue the fact that business, was it not the fact that business wasn't being regulated? Or what do you think? Right now, I hope this is good food for thought, that you can explore this more your whole life, because these are the heart of our political debates now as to what kind of direction would be the best place to deal with wealth disparity, and the way we deal with the idea of a worker and a boss, and the whole issue of capitalism that exists now, right? Okay, so we're gonna be covering a lot of things we covered before, but we're gonna get into the heart of things. This is a picture that describes a very horrific event that was very important and influencing a kind of turn against the business class, and a lot more sympathy towards workers and perhaps even unions. In March 25, not 9/11, but 1911, this was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And you should have read it in your textbook, what this was about. But I'm going to show a documentary clip on this to help really draw in this event that is so important, and in a strange and eerie way has a kind of texture close to the tragedies of 9/11 for us with a terrorist attack. And here's something else I thought I would like you to reflect upon as we move forward in discussing things in this chapter. We had, in this case, abuse by workers, a boss that locked the doors of girls so they couldn't get out, and tried to keep anybody from having access to union agitators. So girls basically locked in rooms to work, and then when a fire was set, that they were locked in, and they had some of them, if they didn't die inside the buildings, were jumping out of the windows, and as everybody watched these young girls lit on fire, being smashing to their deaths, and frying to death. Okay, and this was created by an American economic political system. We can think about the levees that broke in Louisiana. We can think about recently where a governor in Michigan, right, just recently sent poisonous water to the entire population to save money, and now people literally have to go try to buy bottled water because they just got poisoned by their governor and their political leadership. Now, if a terrorist would have did that, can you imagine if we found out a foreign-born person deliberately poisoned our water, or deliberately locked doors for girls to die, or deliberately neglected levees somewhere? I mean, it's interesting that we sometimes don't look at the own damage that happens in our own countries without any kind of foreign agitation, and the way that we react differently to a tragedy like this than if it was somebody doing it on the outside. But ultimately, I think in all these cases, we still saw a national reaction that had to be addressed. So I'm going to show a documentary clip on this as we start off to get us thinking about the era that we're going in. I'll talk more about the progressive era. I'm going to have a few maybe clips to kind of go over some of our presidents. You'll notice this textbook, and I've kind of been following suit with it, has really kind of passed over certain presidents. And, I think that what we can say is that some presidents like Cleveland and Harrison didn't leave a big impact in a way that that people still talk about today that much. And then you have presidents like Wilson and Roosevelt that are much more. They were much more involved in ways that they historians will talk about them a lot more. Okay, and so I realize that in a certain sense, some of you who are interested in presidential history are getting a little bit ripped off here the way I'm approaching this. We will, though, be talking a lot more about Taft only in relations to really Roosevelt and then Wilson, okay? And so if you have any questions or you want to go over any points about some of the presidents that we've passed over somewhat in discussion, please just give me a call and we can talk about those things. Okay.